Ethan, a 13-year-old boy, was already used to life among trees, animals, and the incessant singing of tropical birds. His parents, both environmental researchers, had moved to an isolated region of the Amazon to study endangered fauna and flora. Through this life in the forest, Ethan developed an impressive ability to move around in the jungle, almost as if he were an extension of that vast green environment. It was a hot and humid morning when Ethan decided to explore an area further afield than his parents normally allowed. Driven by curiosity, he followed a thin path that meandered between dense trees and huge ferns. As he got further away, the silence of the forest seemed to grow, broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves. And then a new sound stood out, a deep, pain-filled grunt. Ethan stopped, his heart racing. He knew that in the forest, a single false step could mean an encounter with a dangerous animal or even an armed hunter. Cautiously, he approached the sound. What he saw as he stepped out from between the trees made his body freeze. A tiger, with orange and black fur, was caught in a rudimentary but deadly trap. The animal's paw was bloodied, and the metal embedded in its skin caused pain with every movement. The tiger's eyes, still ferocious, rested on Ethan. He was scared, but he knew that if he ran, he would probably never be able to forget the image of that animal in agony. He took a deep breath, trying to control the fear that threatened to paralyze him. Ethan felt his heart hammering in his chest as he stared at the wounded tiger. He wasn't just any animal. He was one of the most feared creatures in the forest, with powerful muscles and sharp claws, even in a vulnerable state. Ethan knew that one false move could cause the tiger, overcome by pain and the instinct to survive, to try to attack him. Yet, as he watched the animal trying in vain to break free, something greater than fear came over him, a deep sense of compassion. He couldn't ignore the suffering of that majestic being. Taking a deep breath to control his nervousness, Ethan slowly approached, his hands raised in a gesture of peace. "Calm down. I just want to help," he murmured, more to himself than to the tiger. The animal watched his every move with intense eyes, pain mixed with the fury of someone who knew he was vulnerable. The tiger's panting and the tense silence of the forest blended together, creating an atmosphere of suspense that made every second longer. Ethan had learned some basic calming techniques for emergency situations from his parents, especially for dealing with animals in stressful situations. Moving carefully, he held out one of his hands and began to murmur softly, trying to calm the tiger. As if it understood that Ethan posed no threat, the tiger slowed its breathing slightly, keeping its gaze fixed on the boy. "I'm going to get you out of here, but you have to trust me," he whispered, his voice shaking. With steady hands, Ethan examined the trap. It was one of those made for capturing large animals, designed to close with enough force to immobilize. He tried his best not to touch the injured paw directly as he released the rusty mechanism that kept the tiger trapped. Time dragged on, and Ethan felt sweat trickle down his forehead as he concentrated on not making any mistakes. Finally, the metal gave way, and the tiger pulled its paw free. For a few seconds, the two stared at each other in silence. Ethan wasn't sure if he should run, but the tiger, instead of reacting with aggression, just lowered its head, as if acknowledging the boy's gesture. "That's all right, you can go now," muttered Ethan, taking a step back. Unexpectedly, the animal, still wounded, approached the boy and stood there for a moment. The tiger's wild gaze had softened, and Ethan felt that something inexplicable was happening. As if silently thanking him, the tiger gave him one last look of recognition and disappeared into the dense vegetation, leaving Ethan standing there, his heart racing, but with a sense of gratitude that he didn't fully understand. He had just established a bond with a wild beast, and that instant, fleeting and mysterious, seemed to mark the beginning of a connection he would never forget. Ethan was still processing what had just happened. He'd barely had time to catch his breath, and the thought of going home seemed like a sensible choice. But before he could turn around and retrace his path through the forest, a snap of branches behind him made him freeze. His heart started pounding again, and he quickly hid behind a tree, trying to see who or what was there. To his amazement, Ethan saw two rough-looking men, dressed in camouflage clothes and armed with machetes, walking around the spot where the tiger had been trapped. Their faces were marked by frustration, and they spoke in low tones, but with growing fury. "Who tampered with the trap?" asked one of the men, kicking the ground and looking around as if he could find the culprit. "It must have been some curious person," replied the other, clenching his fist angrily. "That tiger would have given us a lot of money, and now we have to start all over again." Ethan felt his body shudder. It was clear that these men were illegal hunters. He knew about the dangers that poachers posed to the local fauna, but he had never imagined that he could be so close to them, even more so alone in the forest. The only thing going through his mind was the fear of being discovered and the desire to escape. Trying not to make a sound, he began to back away carefully. But before he could get far enough away, a snap of dry twigs under his feet gave him away. The hunters turned instantly, and Ethan froze. "Hey! Who's there?" shouted one of the men, his hungry eyes searching for something or someone to vent their frustration on. Before they could locate him, something unexpected happened. Out of the dense vegetation emerged the same tiger that Ethan had helped moments before. The animal, with its fierce gaze and intimidating posture, walked slowly over to stand between Ethan and the hunters. The men, stunned and frightened, took a step back. "What? How is that tiger loose?" muttered one of the hunters, backing away in panic. The tiger let out a deep, menacing roar, making the ground seem to shake beneath Ethan's feet. That surreal scene, the tiger protecting the boy who had helped him, seemed like something out of a dream. Ethan seized the moment to retreat even further, but realized that the tiger was staring at him with a look that was almost like a silent order to follow. "Let's get out of here!" shouted the second hunter, pulling his colleague by the jacket. In a matter of seconds, they both disappeared into the forest, leaving Ethan and the tiger alone again. Breathing a sigh of relief, Ethan realized that, instead of leaving, the tiger was waiting. With unexpected confidence, the boy followed the feline, who led him along a winding, sheltered path away from the area where the hunters could return. With every step, Ethan felt that the tiger was really guiding him to safety, and for the first time in his life, he experienced the silent power of mutual trust between man and animal. After a few minutes of walking, the tiger finally stopped in a clearing, where the sun shone through the treetops, creating a peaceful atmosphere. Without looking back, it disappeared back into the forest, leaving Ethan alone but safe. The boy sat on the ground, still trying to absorb everything he had experienced that day. He knew that something extraordinary had happened there, and that unlikely connection with the tiger would never be forgotten. Ethan returned home with his thoughts still fixed on the forest and his encounter with the tiger. He didn't mention anything to his parents, for fear that they would forbid him to explore on his own. Over the next few days, he tried to occupy himself, but the desire to see the tiger again called him back to the forest. So one day, determined and armed with a small backpack full of bandages and medicinal herbs that he had seen his parents use on wounded animals, Ethan entered the forest once again. He followed the same trail to the clearing where the tiger had left him, but found no sign of it. The sun was beginning to lower in the sky when he finally spotted something among the trees. The tiger was lying down, licking its wounded paw. With slow steps, Ethan approached it, announcing his presence in a low voice so as not to frighten it. Upon noticing the boy, the tiger raised its head and its eyes shone with a mixture of caution and recognition. Ethan stopped a few meters away and knelt down, showing the contents of his backpack. "I've brought some things to help you, if you let me," he said, feeling adrenaline mixed with hope. The tiger remained motionless, as if assessing the situation. Seeing that he wasn't backing down, Ethan moved a little further, picking up one of the bandages and looking at the wounded paw. It was still swollen, but the dried blood showed that the wound was already healing. Ethan applied a layer of herbs to the cut and began to bandage the paw carefully, always on the lookout for any sudden movement from the tiger. As the minutes passed, the animal seemed to relax. For Ethan, that moment was almost magical. He realized that he was taking care of a wild creature that somehow seemed to trust him. When he had finished tending to the wound, the tiger tilted its head, almost as if acknowledging the boy's effort. "I think you'll be all right now," murmured Ethan, tucking the bandages back into his backpack. Over the next few days, Ethan visited the tiger regularly, bringing him food and checking on the progress of his recovery. And with each meeting, the barrier between them seemed to crumble. The tiger no longer showed fear or distrust. On the contrary, it allowed Ethan to come closer, sometimes even lying down next to him, like a huge, silent guardian. Over time, Ethan realized that this bond was more than just a partnership. He began to see the tiger as a friend, and the tiger, in turn, seemed to accept him as part of its safe little territory. For Ethan, it wasn't just an adventure. It was the start of an unlikely and profound friendship. Returning home after another afternoon at the tiger's side, Ethan couldn't stop thinking about how the wild animal had accepted him. He knew it was unusual. It was as if the tiger, despite its ferocious nature, considered him part of its own family. Ethan woke up the next morning with a bad feeling. The sky was overcast and the forest seemed quieter than usual. Something in the air hinted that danger was near. He was used to feeling the energy of his surroundings, and that day, he felt uneasy. He had barely finished breakfast when he overheard a worrying conversation between his parents. They had found footprints and signs of illegal trapping even closer to the house, indicating that hunters had stepped up their activity in the area. Ethan couldn't help but immediately think of his tiger friend. Without wasting any time, he quickly said goodbye to his parents and ran into the forest, his heart racing. He had to find the tiger and warn it somehow. He knew that the hunters were ready to capture him, and the thought of seeing him trapped again was unbearable. As he entered the woods, he found fresh signs of human footprints and trails of broken vegetation, as if someone had passed by shortly before him. Ethan made his way to the clearing where he had found the tiger. But this time, the feline was nowhere in sight. He called out softly, trying to keep calm as he looked around. Then a soft rustling in the leaves caught his attention. It was him. The tiger appeared from between the trees, watching Ethan with a curious and attentive gaze. "Listen," whispered the boy, trying to organize his thoughts. "We need to get out of here. The hunters are nearby and they want to catch you." The tiger seemed to understand the urgency in Ethan's eyes. Without delay, he followed him through the forest, while Ethan led him along a denser, more difficult path, hoping that the hunters wouldn't be able to follow them. They walked for several minutes until they found a natural hiding place, made up of large roots and bushes. The boy crouched down next to the tiger, trying to control his breathing as he thought about his next move. But the sound of approaching voices broke the silence around them. The hunters were closer than he had imagined, and Ethan felt his blood run cold. The tiger's gaze was fixed on the shadows moving between the trees, his muscles tense, ready for any eventuality. "We need to distract them," Ethan muttered, thinking of a quick plan. He knew that, with no time to lose, he would have to be creative and rely on the tiger's intelligence to figure out what he wanted to do. Carefully, Ethan picked up a stone and threw it in the opposite direction, where the leaves rustled with the impact, attracting the hunter's attention. The men immediately turned aside, following the sound, while Ethan and the tiger took advantage of the moment to move silently between the trees, avoiding direct confrontation. Ethan could feel his heart racing, but the tiger's calm presence at his side gave him unexpected strength. The pair made their way through the undergrowth, uncovering a path where the hunters could never go unnoticed. After several minutes, they finally reached a safer spot. where the hunters' voices were no longer audible. Ethan breathed a sigh of relief, but knew that the danger was not completely over. He needed to come up with a more definitive plan to keep his wild friend out of reach of the men who were still hunting him. The tiger watched him in silence, as if awaiting Ethan's next move, a confidence that only strengthened the bond that now united the two. The tension was almost palpable as Ethan and the tiger waited in the makeshift shelter. Knowing that the hunters could return at any moment, the boy desperately thought of a plan. There was no longer any doubt that the men were determined to capture the tiger at any cost, and the fear that his friend might not escape this time terrified him. Ethan whispered, leaning towards the tiger, "We need to be ready. If they find us here, it will be difficult to escape." The tiger stared at him for a long moment, as if it understood the danger that was approaching. That exchange of glances gave Ethan unexpected courage. He began to look around, finding vines and branches that could be used to create improvised traps. With trembling hands but driven by determination, he prepared snares and set up small obstacles around the hiding place, creating a series of silent traps, hoping that this would at least slow down the hunters. As he worked, the heavy footsteps of the hunters began to echo through the forest, closer and closer. The sound of voices and cruel laughter filled the air, indicating that they were confident of capturing the tiger soon. "We can't let them win," whispered Ethan, trying to contain his fear as he finished his preparations. Soon, the hunters emerged in a small clearing near the hideout, looking around with watchful eyes. Ethan held his breath, waiting for them to fall into the traps. And, as if obeying a silent request, the tiger let out a low roar that reverberated through the forest. The hunters looked at each other in surprise and advanced without caution towards the sound. The first man tripped over one of the vine snares Ethan had set up and fell to the ground with a grunt of pain. The second man tried to help him, but ended up trapped in one of the makeshift hammocks made from branches that Ethan had strategically placed. "What the hell is this?" shouted one of the hunters, trying to free himself from the traps. "Someone's tricking us!" Taking advantage of the distraction, Ethan signaled to the tiger. It was time to run. But the tiger didn't move. On the contrary, its eyes were fixed on the hunters, and it lowered its body, muscles tense, ready to defend its young friend. "No! You have to leave now!" Ethan begged, his voice low, realizing that the tiger was determined to protect him. One of the hunters managed to break free and advanced towards the boy with a look of fury. But before he could get close, the tiger pounced on him with a roar that resounded through the forest. The hunter, overcome by fear, staggered backwards and fell, while the tiger stood between him and Ethan like a living wall, showing all the strength and ferocity that made it respected in the forest. "Let's get out of here!" shouted the other hunter, backing away in terror. With the hunters retreating, the tiger approached Ethan again, almost as if to ask if he was all right. The boy took a deep breath, relieved and impressed by his wild friend's courage. He knew that the connection they had formed was special, a bond that defied any logical explanation. Ethan lightly touched the tiger's head and whispered, "You saved me today. Thank you." With nothing left to fear, they both walked in silence through the forest, leaving the chaos and danger behind. The first rays of sunlight illuminated the forest as Ethan and the tiger, side by side, finally returned to the safe heart of the woods. They had overcome a seemingly impossible battle, and Ethan felt a mixture of relief and gratitude that he had never imagined he would be able to feel. He watched the tiger walk beside him with a quiet dignity, as if he understood that he had somehow protected not only himself, but also the boy who had helped him. As they approached a stream, the tiger stopped and bent down, tilting its head to drink the clear water. Ethan knelt down beside him, washing his face, feeling the coolness of the water bring him a peace he didn't yet fully understand. "I think you're safe now," said Ethan with a smile, looking at the tiger. "I'll have to go home, but I promise I'll look after the forest. No one will hurt you again." As if it understood, the tiger raised its head and looked at Ethan, keeping its gaze fixed and intense. At that moment, Ethan felt that he wasn't just promising the tiger safety, but taking responsibility for protecting the entire forest. He knew that the hunter's threats would not end there, and that even with the danger gone, he and his parents would have work to do to convince the authorities to protect the area. Upon returning home that morning, Ethan shared the story with his parents, who listened to every word with expressions of surprise and, finally, pride. They understood the depth of the bond between Ethan and the tiger and supported his decision to fight for the protection of the forest. Over the next few days, Ethan and his parents contacted local environmentalists and authorities. With persistence and dedication, they managed to mobilize a protection team to monitor the area. Word of the poachers' illegal activities spread, and the presence of vigilantes began to drive them away for good. The forest was given a new chance, and the tiger, like so many other animals that inhabited the wilderness, could live in peace. Despite the patrols and heightened security, Ethan continued to visit the forest, always hoping to meet up with the friend he had won. Sometimes he felt like he was being watched between the trees, as if the tiger, now protected, was keeping a watchful eye on him. They had shared moments that would remain in their memories forever. And although the tiger returned to its habitat, free and sovereign, Ethan knew that their friendship, marked by trust and courage, would never be lost.